This is a big topic for this week. I'm so excited that you joined me. You are going to learn a lot. And I'm going to be talking about a topic. I teach a whole lesson about this inside Low Insulin Academy, but we're going to talk about carbohydrates today and why they aren't the enemy. I have said this from the get-go. When I work with people on insulin resistance and people who have prediabetes and type 2 diabetes and are not digesting and utilizing carbohydrates well at all for a time, I am usually almost always putting them on a low carb approach, but it doesn't last forever. And I don't keep everybody ultra low forever either. And so many people in this space will put everybody on a very low carbohydrate approach, like a ketogenic approach, or sometimes even carnivore. And while I do believe those approaches have a lot of merit, we've gotten to this place where so many women, especially, and men too, are stuck in strict low carb or keto, and they're terrified to add carbohydrates back in. And so inside Low Insulin Academy, in my lesson about carbohydrates, I actually have several lessons about carbohydrates, but we help you find what carbohydrate limit is going to work for you and is appropriate for you right now based on your goals and your disease state and what it is that you are wanting to do. What are you wanting to fix? And so I don't have a level where I put everybody on 25 grams of carbohydrates straight out of the gates. And I help them find what's appropriate for them based on their goals. I am sitting outside recording this because I need to take advantage of every minute that is nice out, and I like to get my feet in the ground. But one of my neighbors, I have my headphones in, my wired earbuds, I should say. I have them in, so hopefully the sound's okay. One neighbor across the street was mowing their lawn when I came out here. And then my other one right next door to me, of course, started literally the minute after I started recording. So I'm hoping the audio is okay. And of course, I'll check it before I air this. But getting back to carbohydrates, like I just think like so many people are afraid of carbohydrates. And I will say this, I am talking about whole food carbohydrates today. I'm not talking about adding in crappy processed foods. We know that. Like, I want to make sure I am clear about that. I'm not saying like, go start and add in all this processed and enriched bread or candy or, you know, things that we know aren't good for our bodies. That is not what this episode is about. But I think people want to put themselves into these camps all the time. Like, I'm keto, I'm carnivore, I'm vegan, I'm vegetarian, whatever it is. And they want to put themselves in this box. And that's why the approaches that I teach now, I just love, because no, there's no one size fits all, but we can look at our rhythms, our biology, how we were created, our environment, our seasons, what is growing local to us, and come up with a plan that makes sense biologically and what should work for just about anybody. So when we are metabolically inflexible, and I will say Low Insulin Academy, that is my end goal for people who come through my academy, is to be metabolically flexible by the time they apply all of these strategies that I teach. And Low Insulin Academy will be on sale and highly discounted the first week in June. So if what I'm talking about resonates with you and you want to learn more and go even deeper, be sure to get into the academy. The first week in June is when it's going to be on sale. But my end goal inside Low Insulin Academy is get you metabolically flexible. So a lot of people who come into the academy to start with are very carbohydrate intolerant. They are not burning and processing carbohydrates well at all. And so we need to take the carbohydrates away for a time, or at least decrease them so that they can go back and start burning fat for fuel. When the body is able to do this, then it can use fat as fuel. You utilize energy better. You start to burn body fat, and you kind of are tapping into those mechanisms that you haven't tapped into for a very long time. And how the machinery for burning fat tends to get broken is the lifestyle and the crappy food system that we have here. So eating a lot of processed foods over the course of a year, we've been told to eat a lot of healthy whole grains and fruits and vegetables. And yes, those things can be healthy. I'm not saying that they're not, but we've been in such a high carb space for so long. It's starting to really switch gears, but we've been in this place of high carb for so long that the machinery to burn fat kind of got broken. And so now we're not utilizing energy well. So we decrease the carbohydrates for a time. But here's the thing. Like I said, my end goal for people inside Low Insulin Academy and who work with me and who are metabolically ill, your end goal is to be metabolically flexible. So that means whatever fuel you're putting into your body, whether it be carbohydrates or fat or protein, the body does not like to use protein as an energy source. I will say that it will, if it has to, it'll convert protein into carbohydrate, but doesn't like to do that because it's very energy demanding. So whether or not you're putting in carbohydrates to your body or fat to your body, my goal is that your body can burn either, no matter what kind of fuel you're putting in. And so when we're not metabolically flexible, we have trouble utilizing fuel as a whole, but you might have trouble utilizing carbohydrate. You might have trouble utilizing fat. And so when we stay ketogenic or carnivore for very, very long periods of time, I'm talking months, years, we can get ourselves into trouble because then all of a sudden, oh, our body's forgetting how to use carbohydrates as fuel. So it gets a little tricky. It gets confusing. Like I know, it's like people are like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know what is better. I don't know. Now I'm hearing carbohydrates are better to put back in. But this person says to stay ketogenic and to burn fat. And here's the kicker with ketosis. And like I said, ketogenic approaches can be very, very healing, especially if your body has not been utilizing fat. But here's the thing about being in ketosis. You can't tell if you're burning body fat or if you're burning fat that you've eaten as fuel. And I've talked about this in many podcast episodes before. So if you've been ketogenic for a very long time, or you've eaten a ketogenic approach, but you are overweight, you're not burning fat, you might be having trouble actually tapping into stored body fat and just kind of utilizing the fuel that you're eating. That's where Low Insulin Academy can really help you to get to the point where you are burning, body fat and not just fat as fuel. So we are going to talk about why low carb shouldn't mean no carb forever, and how to start to add some carbohydrates back in if you're like terrified of doing that. And I can totally understand it because for many people, it can go back and forth with carbohydrates and fats, like going low fat and higher carb as long as you're eating healthy whole food carbohydrates. That can work really well for a time, right? Because your body's like processing all these carbohydrates, but you can't stay high carb, low fat forever, just as you can't stay high fat, low carb forever. And so inside my academy, again, I help you to find your starting point of carbohydrates, but that's not typically where we end and we stay. So if somebody's not burning carbohydrates, they're type 2 diabetic and they can't burn carbohydrates well, we lower them to maybe 25 or 50 grams a day. I do have a carb quiz that I'll link in the show notes that will help you to find what carb level to start with. But say we start with 25 or 50 grams of carbohydrate, your goal is not to be that low in a year after you start the academy. Like we learn how to flex in carb flex some carbohydrates back in so that your body doesn't forget how to burn that fuel source either. So we'll talk about how to start adding some things in. Um, and we'll talk about metabolic flexibility, and we'll talk about how to choose local seasonal carbs and really doing that rather than tracking your macros. Tracking macros, carbohydrates, fat, and protein are your macronutrients. That can get really old really fast. Um, I honestly, when I was setting up for this episode, I'm like, I should probably know where my carbohydrate intake is and where my fat intake is. I honestly have not tracked my macronutrients in months, years. I would imagine my carbohydrates are somewhere around 100 grams per day. That works well for me and my activity level and where I am at metabolically. I am very metabolically flexible. I don't have blood sugar issues. I have brought my fasting insulin down into a really great range where it was high at one point. So I'm talking about me. I'm not talking about you. Some people who are super active and very metabolically flexible could maybe eat twice the amount of those carbohydrates. And then those who are not metabolically flexible and really, really struggling with carbohydrate metabolism might need to go like less than 50 for a time. But inside the academy from day one, I've had my academy out there for probably 4 years or so. I have had a specific lesson in there on carbohydrate cycling and bringing in carbohydrate cycling days. And my goal has never been for somebody to be in ketosis all day, every day, because that's not healthy either. We want to be able to go in and out of ketosis, burn all of the different fuels efficiently, be metabolically flexible, not eat, carbohydrates and get this blood sugar spike to 280, or from a baseline of 100 to 280, unless of course you're eating a huge amount of straight sugar, that might do it. But if you're eating some healthy whole carbs, like say you have half of a sweet potato and a salad, you should be able to handle, if you're metabolically flexible, you should be able to handle those amounts of carbohydrates. Maybe you get a blood sugar spike, but your insulin is able to bring that right back down. So we are going to talk about all of these things. So, as I said, I just, if you've been low carb or keto for a while, you may have been told that carbs are the enemy. And like I said, that's never been my message to people. And I know, there's a lot of people who believe being in ketosis all the time is the best way to go. But what happens after a while with long-term carb restriction, and I really truly believe in eating in a rhythm and seasonally and locally, and going back to how not only God designed our bodies, but how God designed our environment and the environment that you live in. So being extremely low carb for a long, long time it can start to down regulate thyroid function. And I've seen this with a lot of people, women especially. Our hormones are just more delicate than men. But you need carbohydrates in order to convert T4 to T3, which is the active form of thyroid hormone. And if you've been very carbohydrate depleted for a very long time, you can start to see thyroid function be poor and not optimal. Another thing that can happen, and I've learned a lot more about this in the last year or so, is when you you are not only restricting calories, but you're restricting carbohydrate for a really long time, you can throw your leptin levels off. And like my academy is called Low Insulin Academy, but we talk about leptin and ghrelin in there too. And if we don't have our leptin hormone is not optimized and leptin is too low, we're in this state of scarcity all the time in our body. Our body thinks it's lacking something. It's lacking food. It's lacking calories. It's lacking carbohydrates. It's lacking sleep. It's lacking nourishment. You're over fasting, and oh my gosh, there are tons and tons of episodes on fasting, but you can overdo fasting. I just want to say, I still believe intermittent fasting is very healthy and helpful to correct a poor metabolism, but we don't want to overdo it and we don't want to go too far. We don't want to do the same type of fasting every single day. And so leptin gets thrown off, and that can be really, really tricky. If you're low leptin or high leptin, you can correct it, but you're doing all of these things and you're doing everything that everybody tells you to, but your body is perceiving scarcity. And so it's going to throw that leptin hormone off. Another thing that tends to happen when you've been really low carb for a long time are sleep issues. So if you are not sleeping through the night and you're having a lot of trouble sleeping and you're really low carb or you're ketogenic or carnivore, I know it's scary, especially if you're carnivore, um, adding some carbohydrates in strategically, especially seasonally and locally, can be a really great idea for you. And again, I'm not saying go binge on Skittles and drink Mountain Dew or have a huge bowl of ice cream before bed. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But people are just like lump all carbohydrates together a lot of times and think, okay, like fruit turns sugar. I can't have any fruit. Like, no, yeah. I mean, yes, when you digest fruit, it gets down, you break it down into molecules that are like sugar, but it's not sugar. Like, it's not the same. Eating an apple is not the same as drinking apple juice, right? Have the fiber there. You have all of the whole apple together. You have all the enzymes there that helps you digest. It gives you fiber, feeds your microbiome. Very different. So sleep issues can definitely become a thing when you're very low carb, and can also become a thing when you have low leptin and your body is just, or if you're over fasting. All of these things can cause sleep issue. And the other thing that can happen when you're really low carb for a long time is blood sugar instability, which sounds crazy, right? Like, how can my blood sugars be unstable if I am eating low carb, right? And I saw this happen to me. Like, my body got, and I wasn't always like super low carb, but I got to that point of probably low leptin, and I was fasting all morning. And your body will release cortisol, and that can spike blood sugar. There's other things that spike blood sugar in your body other than food. And so we need to be aware that going way too low carb can actually cause blood sugar instability over time, which seems like it shouldn't be true. And that's why we need to make sure we're flexing carbohydrates. And you can eat low carb some days. That's awesome. Put your body in ketosis for a few days and then bump it out of ketosis for a few days and bring it into ketosis again. Like, that's the best thing for your body, because it's forced to have to adjust to different fuels. And then another thing, when you're low carb for a really long time, that tends to happen is just anxiety, low mood, poor recovery, because our immunity isn't as strong. Cortisol dysregulation can cause low immune function because your body's just taking all the reserves for those stress organs, or not stress organs, stress hormones. And so you just aren't, you're not functioning. Your immune system is not functioning as well as it could. Okay, so what's the answer here? $1 million question. Like I said, get into Low Insulin Academy if you want to learn even more about this, but really the power of seasonal eating is what I want you to think about. Seasonal eating. So I'm recording this in the spring, and I'm in Wisconsin, so pretty northern latitude. I'm at the 44th latitude. There is not a lot. There's things starting to grow here. But for me, my carbohydrate sources mainly are lettuces, asparagus, maybe some early strawberries are starting here. but not a whole lot. And we want to look at what's like cellar stable. And I do eat some potatoes and sweet potatoes like over the winter, and yeah, anything that's canned or fermented, those would be great sources of carbohydrates. But we need to remember that our environment really should dictate what we're eating. And we don't think about that a lot of times. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I mean, I love my berries. I love raspberries and blueberries. So I definitely eat those in the winter, but I don't eat a whole lot of other fruit. I certainly don't eat really sweet fruit like pineapple or bananas or mango over the winter. I tend not to really eat those at all because there is nothing growing in my environment. And so for me to take in all that carbohydrate is just really confusing to my body and chaotic. Um, so if we look at seasonal eating, we can look at like how our ancestors would have eaten and how our bodies are really programmed to take in higher amounts of carbohydrates at certain times of the year and lower amounts at other times of the year. So in the summer and fall, we have a lot of UV light available. Like right now, I'm sitting in the shade, but I try to get as much light on my skin and in my eyes, natural light in my eyes and skin and in my abdomen. That's huge for your microbiome, as I possibly can, because those are all signals to your body. So here's another thing. If you're hardly ever outside, you don't ever expose your skin to the sun, what you eat can be more confusing as well. And I know that sounds crazy, but food is information to your body. And so it basically, eating food is kind of like eating light energy, right? Because plants need that light energy to grow. And so if you're never going outside, you're in this perpetual environment of, in the winter, you're always sitting in 72 degrees under artificial blue light. In the summer, you're in air conditioned 72 degrees under artificial blue light. Your body's kind of confused, like, is it just, it's like, I don't know what season it is. So getting outside, letting the sun be on your skin. Of course, we don't want a sunburn, but letting the sun be in your skin and into your naked eyes with no sunglasses, no glasses, no contacts as possible. I know it's not always possible, but that will tell your body what season it is, how much carbohydrate to expect to be taking in. So we should be eating more carbohydrates in the summer and the fall, some in the spring when it is growing in our environment. Now, if you live at the equator and you're listening to this, awesome. So glad you found my podcast. But things are going to be different for you because you have those things growing in your environment all the time. So your body can expect to have more of that carbohydrate. If you're somewhere, you live in Costa Rica and you're listening to this and you have, I don't even know, mangoes, bananas, whatever, you can afford to take those in, especially if you're outside a lot. But me up here in Wisconsin, 44th latitude, doesn't make sense for me to eat a smoothie with 6 different types of fruit that were flown halfway across the world for me to wake up and eat smoothies all winter. And so that means more carbs in the summer and fall, fruit, root, vegetables, grains, lower carbs in the winter. That's when we eat more of our animal fats and our protein and preserved foods. And so people always want to know, like, oh, should I be in ketosis? Should I not? Look at your season. So I know I was in ketosis a lot more over the winter. I do not measure it. I don't measure my ketones. I don't do that. I can just kind of tell by my breath. I can tell when I'm burning fat for fuel. I can like almost taste it in my mouth, but not everybody can do that. But being in ketosis more over the winter makes a lot more sense because we don't have the seasonal fruit and vegetables and produce available to us. And then being out of ketosis, higher levels of carbohydrate in the winter or in the summer makes sense. Usually we're more active too, but burning off the carbohydrate, you tend to burn it off more in the summer. But I know for me, and I have talked about this on the podcast before, and I've talked about this in interviews, I tend to gain a few, it's not a lot, but it's like a pound or two over the summer. And I'm always like, what the heck? Why am I gaining weight? Because I'm I'm more active and I'm outside all the time. Your body biologically, and especially in the fall, it might become a little bit more insulin resistant just because of what's available, the lighting, all the UV that you've been soaking up and exposed to all summer. And so just keep that in mind. Then it's so weird because I do tend to lose weight in the winter. I lose that couple of pounds. And again, it's not a huge weight fluctuation by any means. But I'm always like puzzled by it. Like, oh, I thought most people lost weight in the summer and gained it in the winter, but that's not what I do. I've always been like that for like the last 10 years. I'll just lose a couple of pounds in the fall and winter. And it's because your body is then, set up to use fat as a fuel and stored body fat as a fuel. But if you go into winter eating, like I said, eating all these carbohydrates and eating all this processed food, and what do? We have Thanksgiving, we have Christmas, we have holidays. It's no wonder we're putting on all the weight because our body is not expecting those carbohydrates in the first place. And then we're just overdoing it. Okay, so we want to eat locally and seasonally. And I know for me, I have a food share, local farmers that I get every single week, and I try to eat that as most of my produce. We always have meat in the freezer. So we're talking more so about the carbohydrates. So if you don't know of a food share, so what you can do is just search, it's like CSA food share, CSA, the letters. Um, and usually you'll find something that pops up, or just, Google or search local farmers, organic farmers in my area, or food shares in my area, and you'll be surprised with what you find. If you can't do that, go to your local farmers market. I do that in addition to what I get in my box, but a lot of times I'm like, I just want to eat out of my box. So if I can't get to the farmers market over the weekend, then, I just eat out of there. And I'm not saying, again, like I don't stray from my box at all, but I try to make what is in there because I know it's grown locally. It's like, within an hour or two of my house is where it's grown. That is appropriate for me. Okay. So focus on that. And then how should we reintroduce carbohydrates without fear? And like I said, I have a carb quiz that you can kind of figure out where you should be for carbs starting. And Low Insulin Academy will be very helpful with these concepts. But we want to first focus on real, local, in-season foods, number one, for sure. And then the second thing, so that we don't get all these big blood sugar spikes and blood sugar dysregulation, we want to pair carbohydrates with protein and fat. Very, very rarely. Honestly, I can't remember the last time. Well, I just like grab an apple in the fall and eat it plain, like by itself, because that's going to cause a bigger blood sugar spike. I'm not saying you can't ever do that, but I'm always eating my fruit with my protein and my fat. And I'm eating it at the end of my meal because that will blunt the blood sugar response. Okay, so you can still use all of these other concepts that I've talked about. I have a master class all about like 10 ways to blunt blood sugar spikes as well. But eating it with protein and fat and sticking to local and whole. Like, again, I'm not talking about going and buying Lucky Charms and having it, as your meal. Like, that's not what we're doing to reintroduce carbohydrates. And then another thing, and there's a whole lesson on this inside Low Insulin Academy, is to make sure that if you're still menstruating, to use that kind of as a guide as well. And so I talk about inside Low Insulin Academy how to bring in carbohydrates like weekly and how to have those flex days, but then also how to look at your cycle and what are the best times according to your menstruation that are best times to have carbohydrates. And the best times is to have them around ovulation and in the luteal phase after you have ovulated. So definitely you want to keep that in mind as well. And then, looking at all of those symptoms that I talked about with being low carb for a really long time and, not sleeping well, having, no energy, having anxiety. Maybe you even lost your period and your fertility's out of whack. And it's funny because being in ketosis and carnivore can fix your fertility, if you've been really high carb for a long time. But again, if we're not adding any carbohydrates in and we've broken that fueling system, then we tend to have fertility issues that way. So it's just this really delicate balance. But again, we need to look at our rhythms and how God designed us, what's in our environment. Um, that's important too. And then the carb cycling is really important. I talk more about that in Low Insulin Academy. But if you're under a really stressful time period or you've been doing extreme workouts, those are better times to add higher carbohydrates days into. Um, and just see how you do. But if you're not sleeping, you're just exhausted all the time, you've lost your period, you have low leptin, and then it's probably time to experiment with adding some carbohydrates back in. And again, our goal is not macronutrient perfection. It's not like, a lot of people who I work with, they want to know like how many grams of carbs, how many grams of fat, how many grams of protein. And I get that. Like you want to have a gauge to start with, but just to start with. And I always say, like, let's use protein as what you want to center your meals around first. Let's center your meals around 100 grams of protein. And then we kind of use fat and carbohydrates as levers. Like, is your machinery broken in any of those? Do you have broken carbohydrate metabolism or broken fat metabolism? And we kind of use those as levers. But I don't want you to get so wrapped up with like counting all your macronutrients all the time because that's no fun. It is very helpful to like maybe do it for a week or so and be like, okay, this is what 100 grams of protein looks like and 100 grams of carbohydrate looks like and 90 grams of fat looks like, or whatever it is. But other than that, like get your protein centered and then focus on getting some healthy fat in there and then eating your carbohydrates locally and seasonally. So in closing, it's like we want to reconnect to seasonal cycles and stop fearing real food, right? Like God gave us all of this incredible nourishment and incredible tastes and smells and food, and it's delicious and we want to eat it, and it's like, I know so many women are like, and I was kind of like this for a while too, like, oh gosh, I can't eat that because it's like, you're going to throw me off or whatever. Like that causes anxiety and cortisol issues too. So we want to align with how our bodies were created to thrive. Carbohydrates are not the villain that a lot of people make them out to be. It's just poor timing, processed food, and metabolic inflexibility are the real culprits. So we want to make peace with carbs and reverse insulin resistance, right? And be metabolically flexible. So hopefully this episode helps you with that. And if you need more help, I highly, highly suggest that you join Low Insulin Academy. You can do that at any time, but it will be discounted the first week in June. So make sure to watch for that promo code. The promo code will be LIA100 and it'll be the first week in June. That will be $100 discounted. So I hope to see you inside the Academy and I hope that you learned a lot this week. See you next week.